Hello, good morning, everybody. This is Dr. Tim McGinnis. I'm the Managing Director of the Society of Citizens Against Relationship Scams. Welcome to our Saturday webinar. Joining me today is my guest host, Debbie Montgomery Johnson. And I'm going to tell the world just how great Debbie is in just a moment. So today we're going to talk about this second half of the topic that we started last week that we've been focused on now for several weeks, which is how to tell your story. Welcome, Debbie.
Nice to be here, Dr. Tim.
Thank you very much. So we're going to begin by looking at our slideshow, so everybody's on the same page with us here. This is a webinar presentation of the Society of Citizens Against Relationship Scams. This webinar is copyright 2022 by SCARS. So what we're going to be talking about today is how to tell your story. This is part 2, and part 2 deals with how to tell your story to family and friends. This webinar is presented by myself and Debbie Montgomery Johnson. We are both directors of SCARS. We each have our particular specialties and avocations. We're both very active victims advocates. We're both veterans. So let's begin. How to tell your story, part 2, family and friends. And this is also an excerpt from our upcoming SCARS Gold Book on telling your story. All right, so what we're going to be talking about is something that is extraordinarily difficult. And of course, there's no proper order per se to this. It is about telling your story to family and friends. Now, you might do this after you reported it to the police. You might do it before you reported it to the police. We're going to be talking about both of those two scenarios. Let's see here. So let's begin by talking about what this really is about. First, it's important to understand that this is not going to be an easy thing to do. But it is easier than hiding the secret inside yourself. By sharing your story, you will reduce your trauma, you'll reduce your anxiety, you'll reduce depression potentially, and improve your chances for a solid recovery. Before we go on, maybe Debbie, you can talk a little bit about how this manifested itself for you, and in the early days, how difficult this was until you had your epiphany.
Well, you know, it's really interesting in my case because I had my mom and dad there from the moment it happened, because I had gotten them involved. They gave me $100,000 to give to this. We obviously wasn't the scammer at the time. But they were an integral part of the story. So when he confessed and I found out that it was truly a scam, I called them and said, this is what had happened. And they immediately came over, just as they had when my husband had passed away. So I always had them there. And for me, that was an integral part of being able to go into the FBI that very first day after the scam reveal and to tell law enforcement what went on. Now, that was great for me, but the most difficult side of it was telling my children, which didn't happen until my book came out. And that was like a couple of years later that they understood what had truly happened. So fortunately, I had mom and dad, but I did have that little inside, irk that, oh my gosh, what if the kids hear this before I'm ready to let them know? So right. That's part of our discussion too, because I did hide that from them for a little bit of time.
Certainly. So the question is really, how can you explain what happened to family and friends? And if you do this, Of course, no one should blame you. No one should shame you. Of course, we do know that this is the fear that every victim has, that that they are going to be judged, that they are going to be viewed as being responsible and to blame for the actions. Of course, some judgment is going to be inevitable because not everybody is empathetic and able to support others. I think part of it is also, when it comes to judgment, what happens with a lot of people is that there's a certain shock value. And when you're telling somebody else about this, they're going to be really surprised. They're going to be taken aback. They're going to be shocked by how this could happen. And when they're going through that moment of shock, they're not always thinking about what they're saying or how to say it and what the impact is going to be on the victim who is trying to tell that story.
Hey, Tim, I just had a thought as you began this, saying, we could tell family and friends before or after going to law enforcement. I actually, except for mom and dad because they were part of it, when I was treated well by the FBI. They couldn't help me, but I was treated well. I didn't walk away feeling bad, which I think some of our survivors, and when they go in to tell the police, they might come out thinking that they were really stupid for doing what they did. They weren't treated well. So I had a very positive experience with the police. But by doing that first, when I did end up talking to my kids, I could say, I've already reported this to the FBI. They already know the story. So that did give me a little bit more power when I told them what happened. So you might think about, the control of getting the police report might help you to have the confidence in telling part of the story later on. Just a side.
Well, we do address this in the webinar, but we also address it in our 3 steps for new scam victims, because in our 3 steps, we don't talk about telling your friends and family, but we talk about reporting it to the police. And I think one of the things that reporting it to the police first gives a victim is one of the most difficult tellings that there will be. Now, there is another version of a very difficult telling, which we'll get to, but if you've told the police already, you're absolutely right, because when you talk to your family and friends, you're going to be able to lean back on the fact that you've already reported it as a crime. So it's going to be unambiguous that it was a crime and that there was a criminal involved, and that changes the dynamic quite considerably. Like with going to the police, before you tell your family and friends, you have to decide what is important. Just exactly in the way of getting organized for the police, you kind of need to be organized when talking to your family and friends. You don't have to go through as much organization, but you do have to decide what's important for them to know and what's not important for them to know. And essentially, it comes down to, when you're talking to family and friends, the simplest explanation is the best explanation. They mostly want to know if you are all right, because you're injured by this crime. Now, as I said, they may not be very empathic about it. They may be running around like a chicken with their head cut off, not grasping the full implications of what this means, but that's really their primary concern. Now, another concern may be the money, and we'll talk about that in a minute, but in my experience, those people who told their family and friends, generally speaking, that was their focus. They're going to be concerned about your future stability. In other words, if you lost a lot of money, what does that mean? Are you going to be able to pay your mortgage? Are you going to be able to feed yourself, etc.? It's really important that scam victims are completely honest. Do not conceal, but you can exclude certain things to not talk about. And always share your true emotional state. If you're traumatized, if you're a mess, if you're afraid, don't be afraid to share that with your family and friends, because if you sit there and say, oh, everything's okay, it just happened, I'm dealing with it, etc., everybody will recognize that that's evasion and denial. And that will make it harder for them to empathize with you. It'll also make them be suspect of what are you hiding. So the best answer is simple, truthful, be vulnerable. You can exclude certain information, and we're going to talk about that in a minute. So like we talked about when telling your story to the police, it's really important that you have your vocabulary right. And everybody has a built-in perception of what a scam is. Most of the time, they think people who are scammed are stupid, naive, gullible. You're not any of those. This was fraud, pure and simple. And it was perpetrated by a professional organized criminal or criminals. It's okay to tell them that you were not fooled, but you did not see it coming. Now, see, the word fool and fooled is a double-edged sword. You may feel like you were fooled, but you don't want to present yourself as being a fool. So avoid the use of that word. Don't use the fact that you were naive, that you were gullible, you can't believe how stupid you are. Smart, knowledgeable people are defrauded all the time. Don't use derogatory terms to describe yourself. Tell them you were groomed, you were manipulated expertly, and you were left traumatized. Those are true statements. They're also at a level that's much, much higher and sound much more serious. And that's one of the things that you want to bring to the table to get across to them, is that this is a serious crime. You can say that you thought there was a he or a she, but it turns out there was a whole gang behind the scenes. It was really a they. What is this going to communicate to the people that you're trying to talk to? It's going to communicate that you were defrauded and you've now realized it was a fraud, and not only cut it off, but you're taking steps to minimize the damage and to take control. Here's another thing that I think is important. And that is that you thought this was a loan. Because I can't think of any scam victim I've ever talked to who sent large amounts of money, who wasn't manipulated into sending the money because someone needed it under the promise that they were going to get it paid back, right?
Absolutely true, Tim. I can guarantee every single one of us thought we were going to get it back.
Maybe if you only lost a couple $1,000s, you didn't think that.
Well, large amounts. That was the big key, the key word in what you were saying. And
right, because
a large amount.
If you describe it as a loan and that it was fraud, it changes the context in a really important way. And it more completely paints you as a victim, as opposed to being a fool. And you don't want to paint yourself that way. Now, you can say that you had feelings for this fake person, the criminal, but that you see that it was really all lies and deceptions. These are important bullet points to introduce when you're telling your story. If you need a cheat sheet, if you need to write this down before you tell people, by all means do that. So your friends and family want to know, are you all right? Your answer should be an honest, vulnerable no. You're very traumatized by the experience. Even if you feel that you don't really know, you might be in the first 30 days of following the scam and you're feeling kind of numb or in shock. Have the sense to let your family know this is a traumatic experience, but that you're in that shock and numbness phase, and you're sure you're going to feel worse later on. Because again, what are they concerned with? They're concerned with whether or not you're all right. Now, they're going to ask, how much did you lose? Should you tell them the amount or not tell them the amount? This is your decision. You can avoid this and just say it was a lot, that you're not able to really talk about it right now.
At that point, you may not know how much it was.
Well, that's another good point. That's maybe a white lie.
Well,
or
true.
You may not have a total yet.
That's the thing, because I didn't until I had incredibly complex and complete documentation, right. But not everybody has all the Western Union receipts and all that together in one spot. That's why I think we need to prepare so that we have that number, because right. You will have to give it to the police, but maybe not to the kids, because in their mind, many of them, not, and even mine, we're thinking, oh my gosh, you lost a lot of money. And then it becomes, what about me? Is this going to affect me? And we'll get into that, but that's a big one, because they're wondering, okay, is mom coming to live with us, or what bills are we going to have to pay in the future? So you may, at this point, may be careful with the number.
Right, absolutely. So our recommendation is that you try and dodge giving them an exact number. And truth is, we know scam victims who've gone a year or two and still didn't have the final number, and they were off by 40, 50%. They're going to ask, how did this happen? Tell them simply that it was an investment fraud. That's a kind of understandable thing, because people get defrauded on investments all the time. Remember, it was a loan or it was an investment. After all, a romance scam is an investment in your future. So that's not untruthful. What you don't want to tell them is simply, you met some person online, you fell in love, and you sent them all your money. That doesn't sound very comprehensible to people who've never been through this experience or understand it. So give them things that they can understand. This is why preparing for this conversation is important. Writing down your key points is important. They're going to ask, did you know this person? Well, you would say you thought you did, but obviously not. That's kind of important, because it gives you the opportunity to say, I was defrauded. I thought I knew the person, but obviously I didn't, which paints you in the light of now realizing that it was a fraud. They're going to ask, did you verify? Again, you thought you did, but obviously not enough. You were totally manipulated. Use the word manipulated, not fooled. Vocabulary matters. They're going to ask, can you get your money back? Your answer is, the police have the information, but they do not think I can recover it. However, they and the FBI, or whatever your national police are investigating, so I don't know. That deflects that question as well. You're not lying to them. You're giving them enough information that they can feel satisfied that they understand it. They're going to ask, what can you do about this? Your reply is not much. You have to live with the situation and plan as best that you can. That statement helps you acknowledge to family and friends that you're not in denial, that you recognize the situation for what it is, and that you have adjustments to make in your life. Why is that statement important? Because in a manner of speaking, you're telling your family and friends what they need to know, but you're also inviting them to help you without specifically asking or demanding that. They're going to ask, what about your future? Particularly if it was your retirement that's gone. Be honest. Everything has changed, and you have to change your plans because of the crime. You don't yet know the full impact it will have, so it's going to take time for you to sort this out. Do you tell them the details and tell them more? No. We recommend against it. Just say that you're too upset to talk about it more. This was very traumatizing. Ask them for their understanding and support. You've effectively gotten through the whole conversation now in a way that you answered their questions, you communicated factually, demonstrated some vulnerability, and that you have a grasp of the situation and that you're working on it. That's pretty incredible. Now, what not to do? Don't tell them how much time you spent in contact with a criminal each day. If you tell them that you spent 12 hours in chat every single day for 3 months with a criminal, they're not going to understand that. They don't understand the manipulative controls that set that up and the criminal's control of you through that manipulation. Instead, talk about how, well, you talk daily over weeks, months, etc., but don't give too much information. Do not show them the evidence. It can complicate things and cause quick judgments. In other words, don't show them the bank wire transfers. Don't show them the Western Union receipts. They don't need to see that. You can say, I gave all that information to the police, which you did, assuming that you reported it first, and that will deflect that inspection by your families and friends. Especially don't share the chats, the conversations, and the dialogues. Don't quote them. Don't talk about the things that you were promised or how he was going to arrive last weekend but never showed up. Use your good judgment, even though after the scam ends, your judgment isn't quite so good because you're still in turmoil and trauma. Minimize the amount of information and generalize it, but don't lie. Don't be dishonest. Be vulnerable. Be open. That's important. Because your objective in telling the story is to help them understand that you've gone through this situation and that you're going to need some help, but you don't yet know the kinds of help that you're going to need. If they ask if you reported it to the police and you have, just say so. Do not show them the police report. They don't need to see that. They just want to know that it's reported. If you have not, well, then maybe you can ask them if they'll go with you to support you during that process. Now, if they go with you, as we talked last week, and they're in the room when you're talking to the police officer, they're going to hear it all. But there's a difference between hearing it all out of your mouth, you to them, versus hearing it out of your mouth to the police officer. Because as you're communicating it to the police officer, it's reporting a crime. They're going to have some difficulty understanding it. But you also have the option of having them take you to the police department, wait in the lobby while you speak privately with a police officer. Either way, that's your choice. If you feel you need them in the room with you, great, do it. Ironically, they're getting the story without you having to tell them, which could be beneficial too. If you do this, as we suggest, no one should blame you. No one should shame you. But not everybody is empathic, compassionate, understanding. They may react, lose their cool. So if they do, there's really nothing you can do about it. You did the right thing, and just sustain it as best you can.
Can I add something here?
Absolutely.
When my oldest, actually he found out not from me, but listening to part of an interview that I had, one of my very first public interviews, he actually became unglued and texted me right away. I said, we need to talk. And I knew I was going to catch it. And we did it via Skype. And I allowed him to just vent, to just get his emotions out, because I knew that was coming. And I didn't try to stop him. I just wanted him to get it all out, because I was very calm about it. Unfortunately, when this happened, I had already met CJ and he was sitting right beside me. And I wanted to hear what my oldest had to say and how he felt about it, because it turned out that he felt I hadn't trusted him when he said, Mom, don't. And I shut him off. And he also was the first one to get the call when his father died. So he had taken on that mantle of let's protect Mom. And because I didn't listen to him, and I didn't after he said, don't, I felt he had a right to express how he felt. However, I was in control of what had happened and the reporting part by the time he came at me. And so I could systematically say, this is what happened. This is what I did. I didn't give money to a Nigerian national knowing that it was a Nigerian national. I've reported it, and I had control over the conversation. He needed to vent. I had the control after the fact. It changed our relationship for the good, because it changed how we spoke to each other. Now we were talking as adult to adult, not young, son to mother.
Right.
And he did want to know how this was going to affect him. And my CJ sitting there going, your mom's not going to lose her house. She's not going to lose this. She's going to be okay. But she does need your support as she goes out to talk about this, which we all will do at some point. That's why we're teaching you how to say this, because you will be an advocate for others one day. So beware that you may get blasted by the family.
Yep.
Just absorb it and realize that because you've taken the control over the narrative at that point, you now are strong enough to talk, not talk back, but talk with them about what happened. And this is fabulous information. I wish I had had a lot of this information before I started speaking up, because I would have spoken it differently than I did 8 or 10 years ago. So this is excellent information.
In our last webinar, we talked about something that was important that impacts this as well. And that is that other family members may also be victims of the scam themselves. So you talk about the situation with your son. In a manner of speaking, he was a victim of your scam. Again, I'm not blaming or shaming. I'm just saying you had an accumulation of money that you lost. Some of that money might have ended up being his at some point in the future, but he's also concerned from the standpoint of, how's my mom going to survive in the future? And what am I going to have to do to step up and make sure that she's not homeless? That's a concern that family members and friends do have. And when you're a new recent victim, it's very difficult to empathize with them about what they're experiencing with the discovery of this information. You can barely deal with what's going on in yourself, or not at all. So sometimes people are going to judge. There's nothing inherently wrong about judgment unless it's hateful judgment. If their reaction is surprise, shock, disbelief, maybe even a little bit of anger, because, and we'll talk about this in a moment, they may be angry at the fact that this happened, but you're in front of them and you're receiving that anger, but even though it isn't really directed at you.
That's true about anything. I mean, years ago when I worked at the bank and we'd have an angry customer come in and yelling at us, I would tell the folks that worked for me, I said, you just happen to be in front of them. They're having a bad day. It's them, it's not you. But you have to take it and then let it go. So take it and let it go.
You can also set some boundaries during the call that this may be difficult to hear, but I need to tell you this and I need you to keep your cool.
Because it's important for you to be able to tell it.
Yes.
And to put it on you, say, this is important for me to tell you what happened.
Right.
And then let it go.
And even though they may not fully appreciate that at the moment,
Someday.
24 hours and it'll sink in that you're doing the right thing for everybody.
Correct.
So, you know, the critical thing is financial scams happen and people are victimized. This is a reality of the world that we live in. This is not a rarity. This doesn't happen to one person a year. This happens to tens of millions of people a year. Current estimate is that as much as 1 in 5 people in the United States have been the victim of a scam. We think it's a little less worldwide. It's going to be between 10 and 15%, but there are no hard and fast numbers. In the US, we can guesstimate pretty effectively. But your friends and family only want to hear the basics so that they can form an opinion, and then they will want to help and support you if you allow them to. This is where it comes back to, don't give them too much information. Be honest and vulnerable as you tell your story. Everyone has heard about financial online scams. This is now a normal part of the world, as we said. Your family and friends mostly want to know how they can help. If you tell them the basics, then you say that you're too upset or traumatized, they'll not ask more until you are ready to tell the whole story. Victims often make the mistake of telling too much information. We cannot overemphasize this enough. If you tell people too much information up front, they lose the sense of it and they focus on the things that are not really important. The dialogue and the story in the chat that you shared with the scammers are irrelevant after the scam ends. They may still be important to you, but they're not important to your family and friends. Don't share that information with you, or they're going to start looking at you instead of sympathizing with you. Our experience is that if you can stick to these basics, that you will not be made to feel blamed. Additionally, you'll have a huge release from not having to maintain that secret anymore. That secret is a cancer that grows inside of you and eats you from the inside. It creates anxiety, potentially depression, because you're hiding this trauma. Trauma is something that needs to have a spotlight put on it, and it needs to be healed. Hiding from it, denying it, doesn't help. Remember, just the minimal facts. Avoid too much information. So this is your best path to share enough so that you're not hiding the truth, that they don't feel like you're hiding the truth, but you're not telling more than they need to know. I think we've said that now about 10 times, but it is the most important point that we need to get across. You're going to need their support. There are going to be many things in front of you that you'll need support to get through. You might need help going to file the police report. You might need their judgment and recommendations for legal and financial professionals. Now, this is actually quite important because as a recent scam victim in your first few months, your cognitive ability is profoundly influenced by the trauma. You're not going to be making good decisions. So you need a wingman more than ever after the scam ends. You're going to need help if you're not coping well, or when you need to talk. It may be middle of the night and you need somebody to talk about what's going on with you at that moment. You're going to need help to make sure that you can avoid depression and deepening anxiety.
And one key is here, you don't need a lot of people. You need one trusted person, or for me, it was my parents, but someone that you feel completely open to talk about what happened and to trust them to walk through this with you. If there's any inkling of shame or blame or whatever, that's not the person you want beside you at the time.
Right. So you're absolutely right that when you tell your story, you're going to be telling it to different people, and their reactions are going to determine whether they are part of your recovery support circle or not. Anybody who is judging, that can't believe how you could be so stupid or dumb, that's not a person that you want to be talking to for the next few months. You want to distance yourself from them because they're going to be toxic to your recovery. The ones who can say, that's horrible, I never knew that these things could happen, I'm glad you're okay, I'm sorry this happened, that's the kind of person that you want on your team. And remember, this doesn't have to be for a romance scam. There are now hybrid scams that include romance and investment in cryptocurrencies. It could apply to a victim of a lotto scam or an IRS scam or a grandparent scam. All relationship scams produce similar trauma. And what we're really talking about is being able to tell your story after you've experienced this profound loss of trust and the trauma that goes with it. Another way in which you can kind of tell your story or make it easier is, frankly, we publish a book that we call our Slate Book, which is a guide for family and friends of relationship scam victims. You don't have to buy this, but if you want to, it's there. And we've had recently one victim who bought 10 copies because he said, rather than me go through the challenge of trying to tell them all, I bought a copy of the book and I just gave it to them and I said, this happened to me. Please read this. And that made it really easy for him because they got most of their answers out of the book, and then they came back and they wanted to know if he was okay and what was going on and how they could help. It's another way in which you can tell the story but not tell the story yourself up front. So here are a few tips to think about. Think about what you're going to say and not say in advance. Don't just show up, not have an idea, and let it all come flooding out, because you're going to say the wrong things. You're going to tell them way too much information. You're going to tell them about the things that were the manipulation, the stories, the lies. They're not going to understand that. Try to get an idea of the timeline in advance too. Now, we recommend that for the police, but it's also important for your family and friend, because you're going to want to lay out how this began, how it progressed to the point where it ended, and talk about the specific elements that you want to talk about within that timeline. Here again, control what you're going to talk about, but be completely honest, because this is likely going to impact their trust in you, and that's normal. But the more open you are about the parts that you're going to talk about, and the more vulnerable and traumatized that you let them see, the less trust issues there will be.
And I suggest too that you write your story down for yourself before you get into all this, because somehow it releases the emotions of it. I found that is speaking out in anybody's story. If you end up telling your story and you're crying and you're just so emotional, people lose, they don't listen to that, you know, and that's just being frank as a public speaker. Now, I've seen a lot of people that are trying to speak out that just are blubbering over what's going on. And I know it's traumatic and it's very emotional, but to have more impact and to show control over what you're doing, make sure you get some of the emotion out. But even I, you know, when I'm being interviewed, if someone hits on a trigger point, it kind of takes your breath away, or you get a stupor of thought. That's okay. Take a deep breath and just keep plowing because you'll get through it.
Remember that we suggested that you write out the narrative for the police as well, so that you get the facts laid out. You don't include the chats, the dramas, what's been promised, what hasn't been promised. All of that doesn't matter to the police. It doesn't matter to your friends and family either. What matters to your friends and family is you. So in the end, that's what's going to come out in their concern for you. Now, there is another aspect to this, which is they're going to have advice and suggestions. They don't know about scams or about recovery or trauma, mostly, but listen to their advice and their suggestions. If it seems like a good idea, fine. Say, that sounds like a good idea. Let me think about that. If they think they're helping, it will also help to avoid judgment. Judgment mostly comes in when people will not let their friends and family help them. Keep that in mind.
And if any of the men in your family were like mine and say they want to fly to Nigeria to get them, tell them that's not a good idea.
That's not even an option.
Not at all.
So now for the hardest conversation. This is one of those places where you're going to have to tell your story if you borrowed money from a friend or family member. Now, if you borrowed money on your credit card, okay, you can just tell them that you were defrauded and you did it under duress. You don't have to tell them very much. But if you borrowed money, as Debbie did from her parents, you're going to have to tell them. And they're going to want to know what happened. Where did that money go? This is going to be the most difficult conversation, because not only are you going to tell them and be open and honest and direct and vulnerable, you're going to have to be responsible also. Tell them you were defrauded and they cannot pay it back yet, but that you will. You have to tell them that you're accepting responsibility. That also will help deflect judgment. Hard as it is, though, don't overcommit to a repayment plan. Don't say, "Oh, I'm going to pay this back immediately. Don't worry about it." Never tell somebody that you borrowed money from, "Don't worry about it," because they're going to worry about it, especially if you tell them that. Tell them you don't know at the moment how fast you'll be able to repay it, but you're committed to repaying it. That also gives them the option to forgive all or part of it too. Maybe they won't, maybe they want it all, but you're in a precarious situation if you borrowed money from somebody, and it's important that you don't want them on your case, so to speak, while you're trying to grapple in the days following the scam's ending. They may be very angry because you lost their money and you don't have it anymore. And they may know you're going to have great difficulty paying it back, but you owe them the truth and that you accept responsibility for the money. That's what an adult does.
That's true with any money that you've ever given anybody. I've lost friends over that because I've given, they were going to pay it back, and then all of a sudden excuses start coming, and it makes it very awkward. And if in the end, if you don't just let it go and forgive that, then you'll lose that friendship, and you'll never. It's just a hard thing. So I guess I've gotten to the point where if you're giving money now, it's a gift. In this particular case, I'd like that gift repaid.
But remember, Debbie, this is the victim talking to the person that they borrowed money from.
I understand that. And as the victim, like I said, don't make excuses. If you say you're going to pay them back, then don't make excuses that you can't, because that will ruin the relationship.
Well,
be honest about
or to other difficult things too. And
absolutely. Yeah, they're going to be angry, but just walk them through it.
Now, one thing that's really important that we recommend, don't have this conversation if you haven't reported the crime to the police yet. Because if you haven't reported it, that's going to tell them that you're not taking this seriously, or you're not taking the responsibility for this. Tell them after you've told the police. Final thoughts. Obviously, the money that you lost is a major part of your story. But telling the specifics about how much, how many wire transfers to where and when, that's not necessary as a part of your story. People only need to know that you lost a lot. You can give them orders of magnitude if you want, but we recommend that you just keep the dollar amount or the number of pounds or euros out of the conversation. This is what will have a big impact on you. It is what will cause you to be angry and blame yourself. But you do not need to share the amount with others, right? Don't be hard on yourself. This is really important. This is one of those things when you're trying to tell somebody about this traumatic situation, there is a natural tendency, every victim goes through this, to blame themselves, to be very negative, to use terms like, I was a fool, I was stupid, I was naive, I was gullible. No, you're not. But if you start talking like that, you give others permission to blame you too. If you blame yourself, others will also blame you, because you're telling them that you're to blame. Focus on the fact that you're a victim of criminals, nothing more. The criminals are to blame. Even if you do not really accept it yourself yet, make this the central theme of what you're going to tell your friends and your family. Your friends and family will be anxious to know what is being done. We've already talked about that. Just tell them that it's in the hands of the police. You don't know any more than that. Truth is, you don't know what the investigation is going to lead to. Even if the police officer told you there's nothing that you can do. Debbie sat in a courtroom in Dallas a few months ago where the police told the victim the exact same thing. Nothing can be done. It's not going to go anywhere. They ended up arresting a scammer in Texas and sentenced him to 14 years in jail. You don't know what's possible and what's not possible until you find out. Again, don't be angry with your family and friends. Now, part of the issue may be your anger is anger at yourself. As we said, they may be angry and direct that anger towards you. You could be angry and direct your anger at them, which is going to cause a similar response. You're going to get nowhere if you're angry with them, even if it's anger at yourself. If you try to still tell your story when you're angry, it's not going to end well. Again, don't try to hide information, but there's a difference between hiding and simply not talking about specific details.
I think a key here, Tim, is that it's ownership. If you show ownership for what happened, they're not going to blame. Because if you start blaming other people and blaming other things and blaming the scammer and all that, then that blame is out there. But ownership is more controlled, and it's positive, and it shows that you're going to get through this with them or without them.
Right. Now, truth is, you have nothing to be ashamed of. You're the victim of a crime. It's important to remember that, but don't express it as woe is me and a pity party. Your trauma is very real. They'll pick up on that. You don't need to dramatize any portion of this. You just need to be honest and open and vulnerable about the parts that you're going to talk about. And the parts that you're not going to talk about, you're not going to talk about them. Don't expect that they'll be happy with you. People respond to others' victimization in different ways. We have 50 years of how people respond to different types of crimes: sexual assault, domestic abuse, etc. Not everybody has their head screwed on well. Some people are just jerks, and it's going to come out when they hear about how a person has been victimized. They're not going to be able to understand it. You know probably in advance who those people are. So again, don't expect immediate support. It may take them some time to digest this. Give them time too. Tell your story. Don't expect that you're going to hang around for coffee and cupcakes. Tell your story and go home. Let them be the one to offer support. Don't demand it, because you're not in a position to demand anything. One last thing that's important: make sure to impress upon them to keep this confidential. And if you've got somebody who is going to be immediately on the phone and posting this on Twitter, don't tell them at all. But impress upon them that this needs to stay confidential, not to tell anyone else, because the police still need to do their job. And you'll tell others when you're ready. This does a couple of things. One is it impresses upon the person that you're telling that you trust them enough to confide in them. It also makes them realize that this is serious and it can have an impact on you, that this is a crime and it is ongoing and an ongoing investigation. After all this is done, be proud of yourself. You did a very brave thing and you told your story. You may not have told it very well. It may be something where you're jumping around like frogs on a hot rock, but this will probably be the first time that you did this, but it will not be the last. Remember that. You're going to be telling the police, you're going to be telling a bunch of different people eventually, and we hope in time you may be able to tell your story to other victims to be both an inspiration and a cautionary tale for them. And every time you tell it, it gets a little bit easier, a little more pain goes away. Be proud of yourself. If you do it, you're going to be stronger. You took one giant leap forward. Now focus on getting on with your recovery. Remember, SCARS publishes books exclusively and specifically designed for scam victims, written by SCARS for scam victims. They're available at shop.againstscams.org. Please take a look. We have our green book, which is our self-help guide to scam victim recovery. We have our Scam Victims Journal. We have our Red Book for organizing the information for your scam. And more importantly, we have the Slate Book that you can just hand to family and friends. All of that information is also available on our website for free if you don't want to buy it in book form. So just remember, we're professionals at what we do. We've done this longer than anybody else on the planet. I've been helping to educate scam victims for 31 years. Our publications have reached more than 7 million people in a little under 8 years. We've had a little under 12,000 scam victims go through our SCARS recovery program and support groups. We understand scam victims better than anyone on the planet. And our recovery programs and support are there for as long as you need it. We don't limit you to a specific number of hours and then start charging you or counseling fees. We understand, and our program integrates our expert professional knowledge about scams, about victimology, about criminology into our recovery programs. We also always advise that all scam victims seek out a local trauma counselor or therapist in their area. So remember that SCARS is a nonprofit organization, so if you can help, please do. Donating is quick and easy. You can donate it at donateagainstscams.org. And thank you for any contributions that you make. Remember, all of our information is available at romanscamsnow.com. If you need to report your scam after you report it to the local police, report it to the Federal Trade Commission at the link provided and on anyscam.com. There will be another webinar next Saturday. Debbie, what topic do you think we should do next Saturday?
Oh my goodness, there are so many, Tim. I'm at a loss for words at the moment because this one has been very important for me. And it's interesting. I was thinking this morning as I was getting prepared for this that I want to find the videos that I did 8 years ago or 10 years ago when it first came out versus what we're doing today, and show the progression. I remember that very first time I talked to someone who said, oh, you need to write your book, you need to get a movie out. It was within days of first coming out with a story. And I sat in a room and I just sat in the chair by myself with a camera in front of me. And I was like, oh my gosh, what can I talk about? And I can't wait to pull that out because there's such a difference in the last 8 to 10 years. And that's the importance of what we're telling everybody today, is that in 8 to 10 years from now, if you're a recent scam victim, you will feel completely different than you do right now. And if you take the steps we've got given to you, then you will be so much more prepared. You'll be able to deal with that negativism. We had a comment here about, we've got to psychologically prepare ourselves for the negative opinions of others and for, the shame they're going to put at us. It's again, we've talked all these things through, but we will become stronger from the inside out by telling our story. We will become the advocates of the future. We will make the change that needs to be made. And it might be 10, 15, 20 years from now that what we're saying is going to be effective. Like we take it back to domestic violence. Those first domestic violence abused women and men, were where we are, many of us are today. But in 30 years, we'll walk into a police department or we'll walk into someplace and say, this is happening to me, and they'll jump right on it.
Right.
It's hard to be the pioneer. So maybe that's what we'll talk about, being a pioneer in a situation that nobody understands.
We did have a comment that I want to bring up, and that is, understand that if you're telling your family members, they're going to talk amongst themselves. Don't be offended and put off by this. This is normal. It's natural. Again, they're concerned about you, but they're also trying to get their arms around this topic, this concept, and trying to understand it themselves. So they know they can't really talk about it with you because you're in no place to talk to them factually about the bigger implications of this. So they're going to want to talk to their friends. The confidentiality aspect is important, but that isn't binding on your family. On your friends, yes, maybe, but not on your family. So don't be offended if they're talking behind your back. It's what families do.
But give them permission to come back and talk to you.
Oh, absolutely.
That's important to say. I'm not closing off the conversation because we already shut them out once. To say, I'm getting stronger each day, and if you have questions, ask me, and I'll hopefully be prepared to tell you. If not, give me time. I will get to that point where I can tell you more.
Remember, you have a get out of jail free card, which is your trauma, and it's not an abuse to use it. If you really are feeling unable to talk about it, you can tell people that. There's no shame in that. And it happens all the time. Now, we also see a lot of victims resist doing the things that they need to do. Everybody is an adult. Everybody makes their decisions, regardless of their mental health and their emotional health. So do as much of the right things as you possibly can. It's okay to be vulnerable. It's okay to cry. It's okay to rant and yell at the top of your lungs. But at the same time, don't do that when you're talking to others. Until you've reached a point where you feel comfortable doing that. Your friends and your family are going to let you know that they're there for you. And if they open that door, you're free to walk through it. But if they're standoffish, they're a little bit judgmental, if they don't understand, you have to moderate yourself as much as possible so you can get through the experience and get going.
I'm thinking a very positive way of starting this is join us on one of those CARS support calls, the Zoom calls. Start with people that understand what you went through and get their feedback on what you're doing. Because we're going to tell you, okay, we don't want to hear all the nitty gritties because everybody went through that. But we will work with you on the steps, and you can practice with us as much as you want.
Now, remember, I'm going to throw in a little bit of an advisory here. SCARS is not a mental health care provider. Neither are we legal or financial professionals. We are victims assistance providers. Our role is to help you understand what happened to you, provide education, information that you can use to make better informed decisions about what you do next. We recommend that everybody find a local trauma counselor or therapist, and that the information that we provide, while it is decades in the learning, again, we're not a counselor or a therapist. So please don't act on the information that we provide to make determinations about your mental health care. Talk to a counselor, talk to a therapist. And in terms of any information that may have a legal import, we always recommend that you talk to a licensed attorney. Financial issues, talk to a licensed financial professional. So, are there any questions from our audience? If there are, please put them in the chat. We'll get them in. Otherwise, Debbie, any final thoughts that you might have?
No, just it's so important to tell your story. And, as I said before, write it down for yourself initially. It may not turn into a book, and that's okay, because not everybody needs to be writing a book. But personally, having that written down releases so much of the anxiety and the angst about what you went through. And by participating in the support groups, by reading the articles on romance scams now, the education you get from those things will give you so much more control over your life and gives you that power to become a well-informed survivor, thriver, and an advocate, because we will change this together. We can't change it one at a time, but together. And
oh, yes, we can. We can change it one at a time.
We're certainly trying.
We do that every day of the week.
Yeah, but then when I get the email that says, I wish I'd heard your story before, then I'm like, oh, we're not doing enough. And we hear that all the time. And everybody knows that. We hear that all the time. And even by telling our story to one person, I mean, I had a woman call up and say, Dad, what do I do? My neighbor just called and said she wants to take a picture of her credit card to send to her friend. And she's like, I know she shouldn't do that. What do I do? Well, the woman that called and wanted to help. The woman that she was calling about, she didn't care what we had to say. But my friend had heard the story, and that's the thing. So many of my friends have heard the story, and now they're ultra sensitive to other people, what they're saying about being taken or scammed or whatever. It's so important to get the story out. So I just want to read this. Telling their own story is the main part of further life of victims. I can't read this. It is a way. It's the only way to get past being a victim to moving on to being a survivor is telling your story. It's such an important step.
Not only is it a good and important part of your therapy when you're working with a therapist or counselor, but it's also a fundamental part of our STEPS process through our recovery program, which is that hiding this information is incredibly toxic. The more you hide it, the more your shame and guilt will increase. The only way to get rid of shame and get rid of guilt is by shining a spotlight, and that spotlight is your voice. All right, everyone, thank you for your time. We're pretty much right on track for the end of the hour. So I thank everyone for joining us today. This has been Dr. Tim McGinnis, Director of SCARS. With me is Debbie Montgomery Johnson, also a Director of SCARS. And this has been a presentation of the Society of Citizens Against Relationship Scams. Again, when we post this recorded presentation, we'll also include the website addresses that we talked about, as well as the slides in the recording. And I want to thank everybody for joining us. This video presentation is copyright 2022 SCARS. SCARS is a trademark and doing business as for the Society of Citizens Against Relationship Scams, a Florida incorporated nonprofit organization registered with the Department of Homeland Security, the Department of Justice, Office of Victims of Crime, and we are also a Sentinel reporting partner for the Federal Trade Commission, as well as other agencies around the world. Remember, reporting matters. Every victim must report these crimes. 99% of victims do not, and it's one of the reasons why scammers are absolutely out of control. Only victims can bring these crimes back into control by reporting. And that's been true, and we learned that lesson in other kinds of crime. We learned it in sexual assault. We learned it in domestic abuse. We learned it in drunk driving. The societal changes that were necessary. The societal changes that are necessary here is, as Debbie says, victims have to own this and make the effort to report these crimes, as well as talk to friends and family about them so they can understand. And it's not just about them understanding you, it's about you communicating the dangers of these crimes so that they can avoid them. Thank you, everyone. Debbie?
Thanks, Tim.